The masked monster stalks his prey.
He might be in the backyard.
The smell of evil oozing from every pore.
He might be behind a bush.
And when darkness fills the night sky, he quenches his insatiable thirst for blood.
And there was a man standing there with a ski mask, with a long butcher knife,
taunting his victims, reminding them that their night of terror will last forever.
I'm going to spread your blood all over my body.
And how he's described physically is underwhelming.
Extremely small penis.
Cops say no one was safe from the madman known as the Golden State Killer until now.
Finally, I am seeing the face of this guy that I've only known with a mask on.
You've heard about the dramatic arrest of the alleged serial killer who terrorized California for 42 years.
In a perfectly executed arrest, my detectives arrested James Joseph DeAngelo, 72 years old, living in Citrus Heights.
Now, you're about to learn how investigators found the evidence to build a case against Joseph DeAngelo. Cops suspect him of committing at least 12 murders, more than 50 rapes, and over 100 burglaries.
Very quickly, we were tied and gagged and blindfolded.
Jane Carson-Sandler is one of the earliest victims. She says after midnight, a masked intruder burst in as her 3-year-old son was sleeping next to her.
And he was just standing right over me. I mean, he put a knife right to my chest and made a few little cuts. We were tied and gagged and blindfolded very quickly. He told me if I were to say anything, he would kill both of us. And he just kept telling me to shut up.
Jane says the attacker lurked inside the house for an hour until he finally left. She claims her assailant made sure she would never forget him.
He'd call and then there would be no one on the other end of the phone. And I just knew it was him.
Mary Beardsley claims she got a similar threatening message on her answering machine back in 1986. She now believes it could have been the Golden State Killer stalking her.
The same, I'm gonna kill you. The same cadence of speech.
How long have you personally been tracking this man?
24 years.
Just before DeAngelo's news-making arrest, Paul Holes retired as an investigator with the Contra Costa County DA's office. He spent virtually his entire career searching for the suspect.
The last 10 years was pretty much, I've been on this case for around the clock.
How many persons of interest did you rule out within this time?
Many. I couldn't even tell you.
Holes says the Golden State Killer left a verbal clue during one attack, a clue he has been pursuing for years.
Literally raping that victim. He is saying, I hate you, Bonnie, over and over again. So we've always thought this guy has a significant Bonnie in his life.
And because the perp wore a mask and left no fingerprints behind, the only physical description to go on was scanty.
They all described him having an extremely small penis.
Sacramento County Sheriff's investigator Carol Daly says that creepy clue could be key to the case.
We followed through on everything that was unusual. So when they started talking about how small his penis was, we went to a doctor to see if there was a condition of kind of an infantile penis, a patients that they might see.
Investigators say as the suspect notched more crimes on his belt, he became more brazen.
At a certain point, he separates the female out into the family room, and he comes in with the dishes and puts it on the male's back and tells the male, if I hear these move, she's dead, or I'm going to cut a part of her off and bring it to you.
Cops say his last known attack was in 1986, but the search to find him never ended.
How much of that did you feel like I'm this close?
There have been many times over the years when I thought I had him, and I'm thinking, I've got him. I just need the DNA results to come back.
Familial DNA would be the key that would unlock the mystery. Paul checked ancestry websites for any similarities to the suspect's DNA from the rape kits.
I needed to see if I could find potential relatives, even distant relatives, to help identify the Golden State Killer.
And what ultimately led you to Joseph James DeAngelo?
So I found a few relatives, and by looking at who they were, we found DeAngelo coming up as a possible person of interest.
But cops still didn't have enough. The first sample was only touch DNA. They had to go back for more. So now a task force of the FBI and the Sacramento Sheriff's Office starts following DeAngelo. It was an undercover operation, but some neighbors sensed something strange was going down. Did either of you notice surveillance, or perhaps there's an undercover officer in the neighborhood? Did you see any of that?
I actually did.
Kevin and Grant, who don't want their last names used, both live on the street behind DeAngelo's house.
I walk my kids, like on my days off, we go on walks in the wagon and around the neighborhood, and we walk past Joe's house a fair amount. And there was just a minivan with the windows all tinted, and I glanced at it and I was like, that's odd. I was like, I don't know why that's there.
I talked to some of his neighbors on the right and left of his house, and they said 6 or 7 days before the arrest, they started noticing undercover vehicles in the neighborhood.
So actually, some of the neighbors caught on to that. Do you think that he did at one point?
With him, it is always possible.
Investigators were desperately trying to get a second form of DNA. They still won't reveal exactly how they got it, but once they did, cops moved in quickly.
We had 2 DNA samples that were obtained at different times. An initial DNA sample that was tested, and it gave us some information that we're on the right track. And then finally a better DNA sample, again discarded in a public location, that conclusively showed DeAngelo was the Golden State Killer. It was sufficient for an arrest warrant to be obtained.
Did he go willingly, or was there a standoff?
Let's just say that he didn't have a choice in the way it was done. When he's taken into custody, you could see that he was stunned that he had been caught.
And investigators soon learned they arrested a former cop. DeAngelo was a police officer in Auburn, California, but was fired after he was accused of shoplifting a can of dog repellent and a hammer.
He was hiding behind his badge. You know, it's very duplicitous in terms of, on one hand, he's sitting there issuing, traffic tickets. On another hand, he's taking that uniform off and going and raping and ultimately killing.
In later years, DeAngelo worked as a mechanic for this truck distribution center in nearby Roseville. And what about that mysterious woman named Bonnie?
We did run across the newspaper article of an engagement to a Bonnie back in 1970. So that caught my attention. And then it's like, well, where's the marriage as a result of that engagement? And we didn't find that marriage. So it looked like it was a relationship that went sideways on him.
Did heartbreak lead to the heartless attacks on dozens? Coming up,
he was usually wandering around, screaming and cursing.
We go to DeAngelo's street and learn the weird nickname the neighbors call him. Plus,
My team's working to build and prepare the case for trial.
And how a judge wants to make DeAngelo's private parts public record.
How did that feel when finally, after all of these years later, you had your guy?
It was a surreal moment for me. Finally, I am seeing the face of this guy that I've only known with a mask on.